sort of point for the future. After this session, we're going to go to the National Library to see an exhibition of the treasures of the National Library regarding Jewish women's cultural capital under Islam. So you can leave your things here. It's better that you leave things here, because otherwise you'll need to deposit them on the entrance to the library. So it's better to leave your things here, and then we'll walk together to the library. Hopefully we'll have some sort of way of keeping you all together, and then we'll do a short explanation with the exhibition and everything. I wanted you to know what's coming next.
From there we go to the Excelsia for...
No.
Afterwards?
No.
No, lunch is here.
here.
Then we come back here for lunch.
שומעים אותי? שומעים את המיקרופון?
Sorry? No, you can if it's a small thing, it's fine.
לא, כי מקליטים את הקונפרנס.
Only speakers are invited to lunch. If you don't have a tag, we can't feed you. So everyone else? Unfortunately. Next door is one cafeteria, Fabio, that's dairy, and in the administration building by the entrance to the campus is a meat cafeteria in the basement. So thank you. And lunch will be after the exhibition.
Here.
From 12:45 here, where we ate yesterday, and 2 o'clock we start the next session.
Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce the woman who needs no introduction, because you've all been interacting with her. Anabella Esperanza is a master's student at the Hebrew University, writing a thesis titled Jewish Women's Writing in Judaismo, which is Judeo-Spanish, in the late Ottoman Empire, Istanbul, Salonika, and Ceres, I'm saying this correct, from 1870 to 1905. Anabella is the research assistant of the research group, and she is a member of another research group, Young Researchers at the Ben Tzvi Institute for the Study of Jewish Communities in the East.
Thank you. Thank you very much. La cortesía, o reglas del buen comportamiento, the courtesy of, or rules of good behavior, written by Rosa Cabaye in Istanbul, 1871, in Judeo-Spanish, or Judaismo, is, as far as we know today, the first essay written by a woman in...
Are you hearing the microphone from her?
Are you here?
So you need to put it closer. On her. Yes.
Hello.
Okay, so אם את יכולה להזיז את זה יותר קרוב.
לאן? Hola? Okay. As far as we know today, the first essay written by a woman in Judeo-Spanish, an essay inspired by the French genre savoir-vivre. At the time Cabaye was writing, there were no institutions for formal education for girls. The author refers to this and writes her book with the aim of providing some education to young girls and women by teaching rules of etiquette and behavior. In this paper, I will argue that the essay reveals the particular kinds of cultural capital available to Jewish women of the upper economic classes in the late 19th century in Istanbul, through the study of Cabaye's sources and the way in which she cites sources from the Jewish tradition and from non-Jewish texts. So, my presentation today is entitled Cultural Capital in Transition. And with the term transition, I meant to encapsulate very important processes both in the Ottoman Empire and in the Jewish society within it. For the Ottoman Empire, there were two crucial eras around this time: the Tanzimat reforms, in Turkish Reorganization, a series of reforms promulgated between 1839 and 1876 under the reigns of Sultans Abdulmecid the First and Abdul Aziz, as you can see in the pictures, thanks to Encyclopedia Britannica. These reforms, heavily influenced by European ideas, were intended to create a fundamental change from the old system based on theocratic principles to that of the modern state.
For our context, the Tanzimat was important in creating reforms in the status of minorities, among them Jews. And the second era, the Hamidian era, led by Abdul Hamid II, characterized by a vigorous policy of defensive westernization. Abdul Hamid II looked to the West for techniques of administration, industry, and finance. Among other changes, he introduced the establishment of a new system of education, including female formal education, utilizing European teaching techniques. Yesterday we had listened about the Alliance and its influence. And here we see that the interaction with the French culture determined new patterns of culture, not only within the Jewish population, but in the large context of the Muslim society. So I'll say it again because of the microphone. The connection with the French culture was not only Jewish connection, like the Jewish population and the French culture, but it was something as part of the Ottoman Empire. According to Elizabeth Frierson, I quote, "This movement left a large literary record in monographs, poetry, novels, plays, and memoirs. Women also tangled publicity with questions of gender and modernity a la Franca, as we say to Jewish women, in freestanding women's newspapers or ladies' magazines," end quote. These reforms were also seen within the Jewish population. La Cortesia was published at the time at which there was no formal education for Jewish girls, and they were taught privately in their homes, when the family could afford it, of course, as in the Muslim society. Teaching was done usually very in informal way, through the oral medium, as Bernae had pointed out. Additionally to the opening of foreign schools, as was discussed yesterday, I will not discuss that, female literacy and the transition to Jewish females' modernization are directly related to the new patterns of the Ottoman Jewish press in the 18th century, with the rise of compositions and translations of rabbinical works to vernacular, from Hebrew to vernacular, and in the 19th century with the rise of a secular literature written mostly in Judeo-Spanish. This was accessible to a broader audience of readers and listeners, among them female audiences. So, Rosa Cabaye was the great-granddaughter of Ezekiel Cabaye, named Baghdadli, who had been Saraf Bashi, banker of the Sultan Mahmud II, and the daughter of Ezekiel Cabaye, also the second, a senior judge who held several government offices during the reigns of Sultan Abdul Aziz and Abdul Hamid II. As part of my MA thesis, I show that Rosa was raised in a multicultural atmosphere. Cabaye's families established contact with the Ottoman Muslim elite, since her father became president of the Supreme Criminal Court of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Jewish elite, as Ezekiel, her father, served also as the editor of the famous Judaismo periodical El Journal Israelite, among other functions within the Jewish society. Rosa dedicated her essay to David Carmona Afende, who served at the time as director of the Majlis Gashmi, the secular council of the Jewish community in Istanbul, indicating the social capital of the family. Rosa's father also composed and translated essays in Turkish, Judaismo, and Hebrew. So we don't know much about Rosa's biography, since she is not even mentioned
in the large research done about her family. We know about her death date thanks to a necrology found by Dova Cohen in a Judeo-Spanish newspaper. A close reading of her essay demonstrates that she was provided with a wide education by a private home teacher focusing on both religious and secular France-oriented content. Additionally, the essay reveals a rich multilingualism. The author makes intensive use of French and Italian component, Ottoman Turkish component, and Hebrew component. A sociolinguistic analysis shows that words, expressions, abstract nouns, etc., in those languages are introduced to Cabaye's oral expression as well as the written one. Cabaye's courtesy essay was printed in the print house of the newspaper Journal Israelite, as you can see here. Edited by Rosa's father. Additionally, Rosa translated a comedy from Greek to Judeo-Spanish, which was not preserved. So I will focus my examples of the expressions of cultural capital. I will focus on Jewish and French sources. So in one of the her chapters, she writes la exclamación del señor Verar en su libro Butón. You can see also the translation in the PowerPoint. When we look for this source, something Verar, Butón, we find that indeed there was a manual book for French etiquette. That this is the manual, this one, and it was printed in France at least 5 times close to Cabaye's publication. So probably we can say that she knew it and she knew how to use it. Another French figure that Cabaye cites endless times is Francois Vanillin, a French Roman Catholic archbishop, theologian, poet, and writer from the end of the 17th century, who composed various essays, among them the Theatrice on the Education of Daughters in 1687. His essays were printed again during the 18th and 19th century thanks to Rousseau and other images of the French images. In the following example, we see that Cabaye not only was inspired by this figure, but she cites directly from his composition. I will not read the example because of time, but we can recognize here not only the same meaning of the 2 paragraphs, but also the use of the same prominent words as the remarkable words, as rubinan, sostienen, as you see it here. Rubinan, sostienen, raza humana, principalmente, and we see all those words also in the Fenelon essay composition. So there are also Jewish expression of cultural capital. In the introduction of her essay, Cabaye claims that the instructions of the courtesy already exist in the Jewish law, Torah. This can be in order this exclamation. This can be in order to gain social legitimacy from her intended reader, the Jewish readership, as well as an act of apologetics. But she cites 2 psukim to testify that. Amarás a tu compañero como a tu propio. That is translated. And con sudor de tus faces comerás pan. In contrast to the French sources, which mostly are brought with their respective references, the Jewish sources are brought without any reference, such as the sages, the Torah in general. Looking at the books and manuscripts at Gabay's family's house, we probably could find a commentary to the Bible in Judaismo and maybe in French as well. Additionally, we would find books of moral literature. In chapter 9 of the courtesy book in Judaismo deals with rules of for eating. Rosa naturally introduced to the text as part of those manners the mitzvot related to meals. For example, netilat yadayim, the right of washing the hands before eating bread, birkat hamazon, the blessing after the meal. And she explains. You can read the translation. Antes y después de comer, la persona es menester que bendiga al Dios, y las mujeres son obligadas en birkat hamazon, y no se puede hacer manco de helio, sea de vallarico o sea a gritos, porque se envecen su familia. I will read this. Sorry. Before and after eating, a person must bless, whether silently, she must say it, whether silently or aloud, in order to teach family members. The mitzvot of Netilat Yadayim and Birkat Hamazon are by no doubt the most well-known and addressed mitzvot of the rabbinical literature in Judaism. To illustrate this, I would like to show you one of the references in the composition Me'am Loez to the Bible, but we already spoke about Me'am Loez. A canonical composition first published in Istanbul by Rabbi Yaakov Huli in 1730. So he said, know that like men, women are obligated to hear the grace after meals with intent to fulfill their duty and to respond amen to each blessing. They should know that in this matter there is no difference between men and women. And if a woman does not know how to say the grace after meals, her husband or son must say it aloud, and she must open her ears and hear each and every word. The study of both sources demonstrates that Rabbi Yaakov Huli and Rosa Cabaye had different perceptions about who is responsible for the family blessing. While Rabbi Yaakov Huli claims that men must recite the blessing aloud in case women don't know it by heart, Cabaye argues the opposite. And and through the essay in this example, Rosa attributes to the women the responsibility of teaching, educating, and instructing their families. Moreover, and this is more important for us in this presentation, this example shows that the female author didn't earn her knowledge about those mitzvot from one single source, but that she made a synthesis from various sources, probably from both the oral tradition and the well-written text. So I'm summarizing. The example shown in this presentation shed light on the multicultural education that Rosa Cabaye was provided with, and the ability to move from one culture to another, in order to make accessible the courtesy manners to the Judeo-Spanish female readers. Clearly, it is not an act of translation from one language to another, but from one culture to another. Following Roger Chatier approach of translated studies and Itamar Ibn Zohar of a translated literature in a polysystem culture, we can identify in Cabaye's essay a literature that is transferred from one original culture to the other receptor one, while the receptors may read differently the translated texts. A question for further research that I will not have time to elaborate in this presentation is the new interpretation of Cabaye's readership. how the Judeo-Spanish society, a culture in transition, as the Ottoman Empire in transition, had read those new texts. This is my last paragraph. Rosa Cabaye attracts our interest in two levels. On one hand, we are interested in her own story and composition. On the other hand, by studying her contribution, we can learn about the cultural capital of Jewish women in Istanbul before the entry of Western Jewish education system as part of a broader cultural system. This essay exposes a particular kind of cultural capital available to Jewish women of the upper economic classes in the late 19th century in Istanbul, when the first Jewish women writers in Judaism approached to the written medium. They must have to shape or design this written space for the first time. Cabaye's essay exposed us to one of their methods, the act of obtaining inspiration and practical instruments for their writings from various cultures and from the oral tradition as well the written texts. Thank you very much. Wow.
Thank you for a wonderful lecture. And now I would like to invite Elisa Martin Ortega, a lecturer of Spanish literature at, I'm going to probably butcher the Spanish, Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. She completed her PhD at the Universidad Pompeu, correct, I hope so, Fabra at Barcelona, with a thesis about the influence of Jewish mysticism in contemporary Hispanic poetry. In the last years, she has focused on the literary creation, on the literary creation by Spanish women from the 19th to the 21st century.
Vale, pero para pasar ¿no?
Sí, sí, el que está.
Okay, thank you very much.
So,
The access to written culture, which began to be widespread among Sephardic women. No?
Put it a bit closer to your, if there's any way. Maybe on the other side, on the right-hand side.
Here. Now? Is it okay? Yeah?
Better.
Okay. The access to written culture, which began to be widespread among Sephardic women in the ancient Ottoman Empire at the end of the 19th century, opens a new perspective in gender studies of the Jewish minority in Muslim societies. Writing constitutes one of the main vehicles through which an individual appropriates his own identity and his culture. In this sense, female Eastern Sephardic writers represent a fascinating example of how a cultural minority elaborates its consciousness and awareness of its past.
Maybe hold it.
Okay. This presentation deals with this specific issue, the way that both the first Sephardic female writers and those who followed were able to elaborate a new identity through the act of writing and the awareness of its multiple possibilities. First of all, I will summarize briefly the situation of Sephardic women at the beginning of the modernization process at the end of the 19th century. The access to literacy was limited, and for the most part, knowledge followed an oral transmission. To Sephardic women during centuries, it was granted a preeminent role in the creation and preservation of oral literature, ballads and songs, but also tales and coplas. Through this tradition, they could cultivate their creativity and collaborate in the collective process of creation. Nevertheless, due to their nature as oral and anonymous compositions, we don't find in this activity any of the aspects regarding the writer's identity that we will discuss today. It is interesting to confirm that some of the first Sephardic women who left us a written legacy were compilers of the oral tradition. They had notebooks in which they copied the songs and they had learned from their mothers. with the goal of preserving them from oblivion. This necessity has been configuring since the first eruptions of Sephardic women in written culture until today, one of the main elements of their vocation. We would cite here the names of Halia Isaac Cohen, Luna Benaim, Clara Benudis, or Azibela Baruchel, among many other of these women who were compilers of oral literature. The literacy of women at the end of the 19th century, especially of those from higher social groups, is linked with the spread of schools from Alliance Israélite Universelle. But before the arrival of this institution, some of the first Sephardic writers were educated in Christian schools, basically Protestant ones, which offered an education for girls adapted to the new ideas coming from Western Europe. At the meantime appeared the feminine reader audience. We find press sections and advertisements devoted to women, but also moral texts with the purpose of instructing and educating them. The first Sephardic female writers show us their contradictions, the identification with the traditional role of women, the continuous justifications of their work as writers, the redefinition of what means to be a female writer in the context of Eastern Sephardic societies. We will analyze here three paradigmatic cases: Rosa Cabaye, Reina Cohen, and Laura Papo. They are all of them authors of essays in which they address to women and they discuss from different points of view Sephardic women's situation. Rosa Cabaye, I'm not going to repeat the biography of Rosa Cabaye as Anabella did. So, you have the text in Judeo-Spanish in the handout, and here is the English translation. In one of the prologues to La Cortesía o las reglas del buen comportamiento, which has been edited by Michael Alpert, we can appreciate an emerging concept of equality between sexes. Mis compañas muchachas, mos despertemos del esfueño que nos hicieron dormir por fuerza, busquemos de adelantarnos, muestremos que el Dios creyó la mujer igualmente al hombre en meollo y en inteligencia, y en poco tiempo mostremos nuestra valor y avergüenzaremos a los que no precian las mujeres. Y el Dios de los cielos estará en nuestra ayuda y todo nuestro saber y entender sea ayuntado a la temor y amor de nuestro Creador. It is very important to highlight that this new identity of being a writer reached by some Sephardic women pushes them to write for other women. This is the case of Rosa Cabaye, Reina Cohen, and Laura Papo. The feminine question is in the center of their concerns and highly determines their vocation as writers. We should remember in this sense the three phases which are described by literary analyst Eliane Showalter in the development of a literature written by women. The first one, the named feminine literature from 1840 to 1880, in which the female writer accepts the common rules and imitates men. Then we have what we call the feminist literature from 1880 to 1920, when the woman erupts in the public space and demands the same rights than men. And first of all, the literature written by women from 1920 until today, in which the female writer liberates her creativity. The three Sephardic writers I cited before place themselves in an intermediate point between the first and the second period. Rosa Cabaye, Reina Cohen, and Laura Papo cannot be considered openly feminist writers, but they show a pronounced consciousness of their position as women, and they claim, in their way, for the dignity of their gender. But at the same time, as we will see, they share and even defend very conservative ideas about the women's role in society. Rosa Cabaye, in the next fragment, highlights again the importance of education to eradicate the ignorance which prevent women from having a deep knowledge of Jewish religion and law. Por desgracia, las mujeres están mancas y de saber la ley. Pero enmeldando este libro tenemos la esperanza que les quitará la llaga de la ignorancia y les meterá en su lugar un deseo de esencia y civilización, y meldarán los libros más adelantados que este, siendo este nuestro libro no es que una puerta a la entrada de la educación. Reina Cohen, our second author, manifests a deeper concern about the role of religion in women's life. she is the writer who adopts more conservative positions from an ideological point of view. She is an author living divided between the preservation of the traditional role of women and the cultural and social transformations that are happening. Reina Cohen had a wide religious culture, and she published a comment to the biblical book of Daniel, Comentario a Daniel, in 1901, written following the style of the Sephardic traditional commentary developed in the last books of the series of the Me'am Loez, the main biblical commentary in Judeo-Spanish. Some years earlier, she had published 2 polemic essays, very interesting for our purpose here. Las muchachas modernas, una buena lección a ciertas muchachas de nuestra época por quitarlas del camino yerado. Modern young ladies, a good lesson for certain young women from our time to avoid the wrong path. It is published in Salonika in 1998. And Por los modernos, un razonamiento contra la mancebez de nuestra época. To the moderns, an argument against the youth of our time. I translated and edited both of these texts in 2013. Reina Cohen criticizes there the way of life of modern young people, setting herself up as advocate of the traditional Sephardic society. Nevertheless, she addresses to a feminine audience, and with her irruption in the literary public sphere, she shows that something is changing in the traditional role assigned to women. Reina Cohen is also the author of an unpublished autobiography in which she relates mystical experience, but this is the subject of Professor Gila Hadar in the next session. Reina Cohen, as Rosa Cabaye, addresses herself explicitly to women. Es a vosotras, señoritas modernas, que me adreso. El espíritu moderno trocó enteramente vuestras naturas. Si los sabios antiguos, que hablaban tanto por la maravillosa fuerza de la mujer en verso el hombre, se toparían en esta época y verían vuestra flosura de corazón, como vos estás dejando somballer de los hombres y estás cayendo en sus redes, y van a decir, ¿es esto posible? ¿Puede ser que el fiero se abolte por calay y el calay por fiero? ¿Cómo la mujer, la crianza más fuerte que existe en el mundo, de venir agora tanto floja? The thesis of Reina Cohen, which coincides with the ideas presented by Zemak Rabiner in his famous work Las Madres Judías de la Época Bíblica, Jewish Mothers in Biblical Period, published in 1913, is that Jewish traditional religion offers a privileged place to women. According to them, biblical heroines such as Sarah or Judith were women with a huge influence on men. They were strong, and from their feminine position, sometimes manipulating men, had a great power. Reina Cohen changes up the emerging feminist discourse and uses her ability to write to claim for the maintenance of traditions against modernization. She considers that the role of women at home and in the religious education of children is a fundamental link for the cohesion of Sephardic communities. As we have seen, she warns women against westernization because, according to her, these ideas will weaken them and they will be finally humiliated by men. Nevertheless, it is paradoxical that the tool she uses to express these ideas is somehow the result of this incipient modernization. Indeed, she criticizes the social changes that had permitted her the access to education and literacy, and even the publication of her works. It is thus an example of the contradictions of first Sephardic writers because she uses an emancipatory tool such as writing to renew traditional values. We could say that she is an anti-feminist writer, as the aim of her polemic text is to persuade young women not to be seduced by modernization. She is especially worried about the new relationship between men and women. She warns young ladies against thinking that they will be more free being modernas. According to her, it is exactly the contrary. These changes lead to a complete submission of women, something that did not happen in traditional society. She focuses her discourse on the idea that young women are being deceived. Ahora me voy a voltar por hablaros a vosotras, oh señoritas modernas, que y a vosotras vos topo mucha culpa. Prima que vos afeitáis con todo modo de afeite, y vos afermosiguáis con hermosuras falsas, y vos enluzáis con mucho luxo y fantasía, para hacer bullir la sangre de los mancebos, ¿no sabéis que a quien mal pensa para sí se lo pensa? Que este bullor está cayendo en vosotras propias, que lo que pensáis de hacerles a los mancebos, vos hacen los mancebos a vosotras, que con sus artificios y flaterías vos engañan y vos aferran en sus redes, fin que se enfastían y vos abandonan. Y todo lo que percuráis de afeitarvos y de afermosiguarvos para hacervos amar de ellos es en baldes, la hermosura falsa que mercáis es baldía. Las paras vos quedan gastadas y no ganáis nada. Los mancebos modernos no se dejan somballer de la hermosura, ni de los afeites, ni de los luxos. Well, after these two pioneer incursions in the essays written by Rosa Cabaye and Reina Cohen, we are going to shift our attention to Laura Papo, who is the first great female writer in Judeo-Spanish, with an extended work in different literary genres and a full consciousness of her duty. She was born in Sarajevo in 1881 and died in 1942. She signed her works with the pseudonym Bohoreta, which means older sister. She was educated in the school of the Alliance Israélite Universelle of Istanbul, but she spent the most of her life in Sarajevo, where her sisters ran their own business, a fashion boutique. She is thus an example of modern and emancipated Sephardic woman. The fact that she lived in Sarajevo helps to explain her economic activity, and it was a place where the situation of women changed faster. She cultivated poetry, narrative, theater, and essay. In this context, it is especially relevant the essay La Mujer Sefardí de Bosnia. Laura Papo describes the situation of Sephardic women in traditional society and the changes experimented in the last 50 years. With the access of women to education and remunerated work, the end of arranged marriages, and the adoption of the new habits and customs. The first text I chose from Laura Papo stresses again the importance of education and literacy of women. The author denounces that some younger women are not conscious of the privilege that they have compared to their grandmothers being able of reading and writing. The act of reading is conceived as a liberation but also as a source of pleasure, something that has improved considerably the life of women. In addition, Laura Papo affirms that illiteracy was a suffering for the majority of women who were jealous of the few who could read. Literacy is conceived as a source of empowerment and self-satisfaction. Se puede decir que ella tuvo interés por saber y el analfabetismo las hizo sufrir. El no saber meldar las gulió mucho. Conté que las pocas mujeres que merecieron a saber meldar ladino fueron enviadadas como hoy nos envidian milloneras. Hoy en día, cuando las mancebas las echan en cara a las viejas que quieren más gozar que las jóvenes, ellas dan una respuesta muy original, y esto una como la otra. Ey, mis fillicas, vosotras vivisteis en buen dor, sabéis meldar aquellos libros, oh alma mía. Ellas ya dubian que el meldar puede ser un buen compañero en la soledad, y dicen los sabios que aquel que melda con placer tiene algo más de la vida. The final words seem an appeal to young women not to forget the liberating nature of the act of reading. However, Laura Papo shares also some of the ambivalences of the women from her time. On the one hand, she adopts quite advanced ideas regarding the traditional feminine role, but on the other hand, she does not identify at all with feminist thesis. Remark that she already uses the word feminists, which she criticizes openly. In the next passage, the writer focuses on the difficulties to reconcile domestic and working life, and she does that criticizing those women neglecting their familiar obligations to work outside home. Ea, la ganadera, si como es mujer debe multiplicar sus fuerzas. Es ladrar en casa y afuera de casa y ansina trebica, presto, y los nervos se aflacan, y ea mal y malanjo piedra por cabeza. Es engañar la natura, y la natura se venga cuando no se tiene cuenta de sus leyes. Es contra la natura que la mujer peleje por el pan. appartiene en su casa, que sea la que guardia de sus criaturas, de estos chicos que el bendicho la confió, y su lugar no es ni en las cancelarias ni en las boticas. Y que hablen las feministas lo que quieren. Este pleito por el pan de la mujer aflochó el casamiento. Un poco de esta desgracia empezó a gustar y la mujer sefardí. It is remarkable that Laura Papo uses an essentialist argument about the nature of women to criticize those who neglect their marital duties. It is also surprising that she does that from her position of a working woman. But once again, we have to keep in mind that the process of literacy of women runs in parallel to a redefinition of their identity both as women and as Sephardics, and in that process often abounds ambivalent thoughts and feelings, and what we could consider contradictions, such as writing to stand up for traditional values or showing constant fluctuations between the desire to participate in social spheres not long before reserved to men and the will to preserve the specificity of women's world. We could highlight that these processes are not exclusive of Sephardic women, but they can be observed in almost all the phenomena of women's emancipation. The political and social changes that occurred in the ancient Ottoman Empire during the first half of the 20th century transformed, as we have seen, the traditional role of women, but they also contributed to the dispersion and disintegration of Sephardic communities. In this context, which is parallel to the fast decline of Judeo-Spanish as a vernacular language, we find a good number of Sephardic women who decide to write in Judeo-Spanish, even in the main part of them already live in third countries like Israel, Europe, United States, Latin America, etc. Their purpose is to preserve the memory of an irrecoverable past. Among them, we are especially interested in the authors of memory books. The feeling of the decline of their own culture, the emigration, and the loss of roots pushed a good number of Sephardim to write about their memories of childhood and youth in traditional communities. The memories of the tragedy of the Second World War occupy a very important place among these works. The autobiographies of women, widely studied by researcher Pilar Romeu, are full of critical references to patriarchy, and their authors build a faithful mirror of the subordination of Sephardic women and their struggle to get over it. The main part of these works are not written in Judeo-Spanish, but we can find some cases of memory books in this language. I will mention only one case, the memories of Jamila Kolonomos, a Macedonian Jew born in 1922, who wrote Monastir sin Judios, Monastir without Jews, published in Judeo-Spanish and in English and studied by Krinka Vidakovic. Feminist literary criticism has attracted the attention on the relevance of intimacy and domestic sphere in women's narratives. The social phenomena and the political facts are reflected through private experiences, and very often the memory is linked to objects of daily life such as food, furniture, or clothes. At the beginning of the book, the author describes the diglossia of her childhood. She says, "In my childhood, I knew only Ladino. At school, I began to learn Serbian and French. Ladino was used at home only with relatives and friends who spoke in that language." The fact that convinces the author to return to Judeo-Spanish as a written language is the Shoah. Jamila Kolonomos was one of the few Macedonian Jews who avoided deportation and death. In the next passage, we see how the memory of the objects is essential to understand the tragedy and the feelings of the author. I won't read it, but you have it in the handout. The situation is that Jamila has returned to liberated Bitola in 1945, and she owns nothing. In order to eat, she has to sell the only thing she has, some dresses which had been kept by a neighbor. Krinka Vidakovic points out that the principal elements of this passage are representative of women's narrative: the central image, a dress, the female characters, a feminine social role, the provision of food, and where the scene takes place, which is a market. In conclusion, we could find many more examples of the emergence of a literature written by Sephardic women either in Judeo-Spanish or in another languages. My purpose today has been to show how the fact of being writers has changed women's self-perception and how their feminine worth is reflected in literary works. It is indubitable that women write from their particular condition with the complexity of their own contradictions and the consciousness of their particularities. In the case of Sephardic culture, they are privileged witnesses of the changes that occurred in the last 150 years, and they have led the literary production in Judeo-Spanish after the Holocaust. After being precluded from written culture for centuries, they have conquered this space at the time of the decline of Judeo-Spanish, being the preservers of collective memory once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker for this panel is Dr. Susie Gross, who researches and teaches Judeo-Spanish, Ladino literature at the Naime and Yoshua Salti Center for Ladino Studies at Bar Ilan University. She has written extensively on varied issues of Judeo-Spanish studies with special emphasis on modern literature.
So, I want again to thank the organizers to invite me, and we'll start. The novel Mazaltob, written by Blanche Bendahan, came out in Paris in 1930. Mazaltob, which won an award from the Académie Française, portrays a North African woman in Tétouan, Morocco, and the oppression to which she was subjected by the patriarchal society in which she lives. The novel was translated into Spanish twice, first in Argentina in 1997 and recently in Spain in 2012 by Jacobo Israel Garzón. The second translation includes the original version of traditional proverbs and songs in Jaquetia. This paper pretends to unreveal the relationship between women and knowledge in the Sephardic communities in North Africa. Through her novel, Blanche Bendahan argues that women have not only contributed to the production and to the adaptation of conventional knowledge, but they have also produced knowledge of their own. Let me refer some lights about the author. Blanche Benadam Benoliel was born in Oran in Algeria in 1903 to a Jewish family of Moroccan Spanish origin. Her family moved to France, where she was educated in French educational system. Her expression in French helped us unpack the complex relationship between the use of European languages and modernity. Benadam belongs to the category of Jewish women involved in modernity and French culture, but also attached to the traditions of the Sephardic Jewish community of Oran. According to Pilar Romero Ferrer, Moroccan writers discover, paradoxally, their Moroccan identity when they are away from their homeland and affirms it with a certain dramatic dimension. Bendahan published her first collection of poetry, Sail Along the World, in 1926, and her first novel, Mazaltob, in 1930. Other publications are on the screen. Blanche Benadam was a journalist and a feminist writer. According to Israel Garzón, in spite of being writers of minorities, she had a high level of recognition. This is evident by numerous literary awards she received through her career from the French government, the Union of African People, and various French municipalities. She was also the appointing officer of public instruction and commander of arts, science, and letters. She created a poetry prize in her own name within the Society of French Literature. Two researchers included Ben Adam's poetry into their academic thesis. One is Yael Even-Lev in her book The Poetics of Identity in Judeo-Maghrebi Poetry in 1998, and recently in 2014, Milena Pressman in her PhD dissertation La image de la femme judéo-maghrebi à travers de la œuvre de Elisa Rice and Blanche Ben Adam. Blanche Ben Adam passed away in Paris in 1975 without descendants. Now I invite you to a brief view into the novel's plot. The novel Mazaltob was included by Pilar Romé Ferré in a list of 6 Moroccan Jewish women memories. Mazaltob, whether a piece of fiction, autobiography, or testimonial, offers a window with which to assess the socio-political and cultural transitions that took place with respect to the roles and place of women in the Jewish communities in Morocco. Blanche Ben Adam paints a picture of the heroine torn between the Tetuan roots and the Western values. The novel narrates the drama of a young Jewish woman married by her family with an Indiano, a Moroccan Jew who has migrated to South America. Like others, after being 10 or 20 years abroad, José Halfon, the Indiano, came back home once he earned enough money to live comfortable and get married to a very young woman. He hopes to establish a family, to stay in Tetuan, or perhaps live with his young wife to his new homeland. But José's heart was bounded with the libertine life in Buenos Aires, so different to the suffocating Jewish Tetuan lifestyle. Although the marriage was performed and planned and even consummated, the two dreamed of different worlds. Mazaltob longed for his childhood friend Jan the Christian, and also for his romantic novels. José fantasized about human business and his secular lifestyle in Buenos Aires, for he was never quite able to adjust to Tetuan. Having failed in both his marriage and his cultural social relocation in Tetuan, José lives as a thief, far away from the suffocating Jewish community. He sent Mazaltob and her family an important amount as compensation. Mazaltob became an abandoned wife, an aguna, and short. Her faithful and Puritan childhood friend, Jen, whom she loves desperately, offers her an impossible escape route to run away with him to the west, to leave her family, Tetuan, and to reach her freedom. Mazaltob is a romantic woman, product of the time wrestling between the weight of tradition and the knowledge acquired by an Alliance Israélite Universelle Education. Thanks to schooling and to the adoption of French mores, women occupy a very particular place. They have moved progressively away from the roles traditionally assigned to them. Mazaltob's French schooling allows her a direct access to the great European literature, which wraps her in drowsiness and isolates her from the cruel reality. The beautiful Mazaltob is torn between her bourgeoisie upbringing and her traditional education that bears her to fulfill her duty and her feeling that assail her. The unlucky Mazaltob is trapped between two different worlds belonging nor either. She tries to rebel against her destiny, but werebrad and impotent ended her days tragically in grief and death. This story provides several themes aside from Jewish custom and practices in Tetuan Jewry. Among them, the Moroccan woman voices expresses in French and what is referred to as modernity, the disharmony between couples resulting from arranged marriages. The Western image focuses on the Christian and Ashkenazi characters depicted in the novel and many others. Due to time constraints, I will develop only one topic during this presentation, the place of the Jewish woman at the moment when the concepts of tradition and Western education are evolving and changing. The female gender roles and status of the Tetuan Jewish woman during centuries are influenced by the patriarchal order, by Jewish religious writings, and by the surrounding Muslim society. Their roles and status were also affected by social changes brought about by economic development and urbanization, induced through contact with European countries. But the most significant influence on Jewish Tetuan women's gender roles and status was the spread of education through schooling. The first girls' school, which was a sex-segregated elementary school, was established in Tetuan in 1868. Education brought literacy to women in all socio-economic groups. As other girls in the major urban areas of the country, Mazaltob received an elementary education. This curriculum, which was almost identical for boys and girls, include arithmetic, European geography, written Arabic, biblical history, Hebrew, and French, or other European language. As we can read on page 25, Mazaltob can solve an arithmetic calculation problem. She will probably lose the first place in school. Teaching European languages was considered not only a merely imparting a skill, it was intended to instill European culture. I quote, "That day, accompanied as usual by the old maid Simi, she had gone to fetch books from Dr. Brakalov's house, the Ashkenazi doctor in Tetuan. The good doctor has always guided her through the enchanted world of novels. His library is even more important than the Alliance library. The last new publications are sent to him by published." Mazaltob's behavior, her European modes, and her knowledge of lyric singing exposes her to social criticism. The traditional Tetuan woman, La Mujer de Tetuan, criticized Mazaltob, uttering evil and envious commentaries. I quote, "Mazaltob, my dear, does not look like our woman. Much better would be to teach her, Mazaltob, to prepare the adafina, the delicious national dish, the Saturday delicacy." This seclusion concretely defined the division of labor between genders, in which women were expected to deal with domestic duties and husbands with non-domestic activities such as religious tasks, formal studies, economic activities, and communal affairs. Education and knowledge also expose women to European cultural influences and changes their own perception of traditional female gender roles. As Bedanand words, and I quote, "Reading opened to Mazaltob new horizons beyond the closed Juderia, the Jewish neighborhood." The fidelity and the gratitude that Mazaltob feels towards France are unlimited, as is the knowledge itself. France has changed her life. She is an illustrated woman. I quote, "Without France, I probably wouldn't know how to read or write. I would ignore everything about history, geography, and literature." This new perception led to the incipient doubt question against the perpetuation of the patriarchal control. In those days, marriages were arranged by families members, and when Mazaltob's father, according to religious dictates, chose a husband for Preciada, the despreciada, the despite Mazaltob's sister, Mazaltob disagreed, even in her passive but personal voice. I quote, "Mazaltob was silent too, but she dreams. In many novels she has read, kings marry shepherds and shepherds marry queens. Maybe Preciada would be happy with that cobbler, but isn't the judge of a father unfabulous?" Another topic in this book is marriages and motherhood. Two of the major components of women's gender roles as in the Muslim woman environment, where their families' roles as wives and mothers. It was by fulfilling these roles that women established their status in the community. Mazaltob does not meet any of those requirements. She is an abandoned wife, hence the intensity of her tragedy and the shame for her infertility. I quote a tense dialogue between Mazaltob and her mother. Then Mazaltob asks Mrs. Messias, "Nothing yet?" If she were a foreigner, she might not understand, but Mazaltob is from the Juderia, so she answers, "No, mother, I do not expect a child." What a pity. However, you have been married for 4 months. The norm of modesty, which derives from religious sources, was strictly enforced and led to the almost total seclusion of married women. Wives were not permitted to leave their homes, even to visit their relatives. After Mazaltov's father's second marriage, Mazaltob was thrown from her child home by her stepmother Sol. She lives under her elder sister family protection, serves Preciada's offspring, and remains at home out of public view. Besides Salomon, her uncle, Monsieur Charles Balder, the folklore researcher, and her friend Jen, she is segregated from men. The only opportunity she has to achieve a direct conversation and a physical contact with the man was abroad, far from the Tetuan walls. In her trip to Gibraltar, between pages 114 and 19, and finally, the night of the frustrated flight, pages 145, 147. However, the norm of modesty obligates wives to cover their hair. When we can read on page 24 Mazaltov's critical commentary about the meherma, there in Paris, wives are sometimes more attractive than maidens, because marriages does not force them to cover their hair under traditional handkerchief. And Mazaltob sadly curls her brown braids. How long will she keep them? The daughters of Tetuan marry young. The decision to uncover the long hair took place the day before Jean came back to Tetuan. The comparison to Margarita in Goethe's magnum opus Faust implies a prophetic and a diabolic trigger. I quote, "And like Margarita of Faust, Mazaltob loves to look so beautiful in the mirror. More than to recognize her beauty, Mazaltob has recognized her strength. The woman gossip, Las Mujeres de Tetuan, Bubbles condemned her to remove the meherma 2 years after marriage? That was never seen. It will bring her back luck," as a metonymy of her name Mazaltob. End of quote. This revolt was one of many great steps in Mazaltov's feminist position. She does not want to perpetuate the conditions of no existence of woman in the light of tradition, but she failed at least. At the beginning of the 20th century, the time which the novel depicts, and in the 30s, the time of the writing of the novel, women's independence in Tetuan wasn't viable. The romantic alternative was to run far away with her idealized and platonic lover Jan. But when his possessive kiss awake her from enchantment, the enterprise became too bold and she started to retreat. I can't part without me. As a good tragedy, the way of truth and love have always won. So at least the lovers lie side by side in the old Jewish cemetery of Tetuan. Conclusions. Blanche Bendaram tells the heroine's story as a woman belonging to specific local, but also as a woman sharing universal human traits. She reveals in this novel her cultural and literary affiliations and combines two main universes of discourse, French and Jewish. She is also an innovator within the North Morocco Jewish literature as she brings the themes of the struggle for independence of the woman to the forefront, turning this novel into a sui generis work. At the same time, she scrutinizes a community in transition. She also reveals women's capacity to preserve against the constraints of family and traditionalism and the conflict women face as individuals in society. Thank you very much.
I would like to invite the speakers to sit here, and I will field the questions. They're organized. We have one for the audience. Wait just a second. No?
Oh, yes, I guess I have to stand up. I'm Joy Land, and I have a question for Susie. Can you hear me? Yes. I noticed that you had several images that I have used and attributed them to Tunisia, and I assume that the author or the publisher used these images for the cover and for the interior pages. Were those photos from? It's on the cover. Okay, yes, that's what I thought. And we assume by the way she is on the front cover that she is from Tetuan or from Morocco, but she's actually in the ARU archives under Tunisia. So just for your information. And then I also have a Tunisian Jewish colleague who came to my lecture yesterday, and I asked her about that photograph because it has many unanswered questions. And she said, that woman is not from the south of Tunisia, but she's from the north of Tunisia. I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, by her vest. Le gilet was worn by women in northern Tunisia. So I just wanted to let the audience know that this woman is not from the south, where they would reveal their hair, and the hair was in the form of bangs rather than just side like that. So that was one comment. And the other comment was you have an image in the book of women wearing conical hats, and according to my research, that is indicative of women in the north of Tunisia. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but I just wanted to add to that. Thank you. Bye.
Oh, yeah.
The cover, I used the cover picture, and it was chosen by Israel Garzon, Jacob Israel Garzon, the translator and the publisher. And the other picture that I use, I know that is from Tunisia, but I wanted to show that she's not going alone through the streets, but accompanied by her maid. Okay, so I use the picture, but I know that it's not from it. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
So this is a question for Elisa and Susie. You both use the word feminist, and you use the word anti-feminist. Could you give us a working definition of those terms as you're using them in your work?
Our lecture was 20 minutes, so for the definition we will have to take all the day. Well, that's really hard. I use the word feminist because Laura Papo in her essay uses it to criticize the feminists. I imagine that women that claim for political changes in women's lives, it's like an ideological point of view. When I said that Reina Cohen was anti-feminist, it was because she criticizes all the time the modernization process, and she writes to convince women to remain in the traditional role. So that's...
No further comments because, she wrote in France. She doesn't write in North Africa. So she saw herself as a feminist. Even her articles and two of her books, poems books, are very feminist. But it's not the place to analyze them.
Thank you. Thank you all. A question to Anabella. So you said you have like two interests, Rosa herself and her world, and let's say the influence. So if I will ask a question about Rosa herself, her education. So you said she was upper class. Probably this is how she got her education. And it's before the Western education. And you mentioned the Tanzimat. So you think it was the Tanzimat or the changes in mid-19th century that enabled it? Or maybe if you were in the upper class, you could do it also in late 18th century in Istanbul? Or so did something happen to her or to her family, to her class?
I think it's both. I think it's very difficult to separate both factors. The factor that she was from a bourgeoisie family, or a very מיוחסת, aristocratic family, and the fact that the Tanzimat and the Hamidian era were part of the Ottoman process. So that's why I brought that. And I think that in order to answer this question, we should look at other women in the upper class, Jewish women in the upper class of the of the Jewish Ottoman Istanbul. But we don't have women who wrote or who published. Maybe they wrote, but we don't have it. So I think both factors are connected and related, and we can't divide between them.
Right, this is a question for Anabella, but maybe for others in the audience, I don't know. So you said that Rosa Cabaye was, she came along a little bit too soon for the school of the Alliance, and she was educated privately. And of course, to be educated privately, I mean, we think of, well, these are special individuals, or these are unusual cases. I really hesitate to make this all about men again, but I want to think about the fathers of people like Rosa Cabaye, and why, when there is no real system for the education of girls, and yet elite men choose to educate their daughters, either in the time period that you were working on or earlier, and this is the case for women of other religious communities besides Jewish too. Why do some elite men choose this? And is it about those men as much as it is about the daughters and what they eventually do with their education? That's true. Yeah, mothers may also be pushing their education of their daughters.
So, first of all, I would like to also mention Rosa Cabaye's mother, but we don't know nothing about her. Know her name, know if she existed at all. So we know that she existed because she is not coming for nothing. But we know only about the father relationship. Why elite men or women choose to educate their daughters? I think this is something, as you said, in the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community, we see that it's a kind of pattern. Like Asnat Barazani, and also in the lecture of Ora Schwarzwald yesterday, in the 16th century, Rabbi Ben-Benisti also encouraged. So I think they understood it is a very important thing to educate and to at least teach them how to read, and I think it was related in the previous period. It was related most to halacha and to chastity, and in this period of the 19th century, it was most related to education. I hope I'm right.
Stood up. I think, I don't know if it goes to explaining why the father would send or give their daughters education, but often before there was modern education, elite families educated both boys and girls at home, and then often the tutor would come to the home and teach the girl as well as the boy. So maybe that explains some of the circumstances.
But sometimes,
Joyland. Yes, I have been thinking about the role of men in the education of women or education of their daughters. And I had some photographs in my presentation. One was of the native Tunisian family where the father was wearing the fez. Now, we mentioned the Tanzimat. As a result of Tanzimat laws, men couldn't wear turbans, they had to wear the fez, and that was a sign of modernity. That meant the father was modern, he was making his own children modern. And without the father's permission or encouragement, the girls would never have had an education because the mother had no say about anything. And so today we say, oh, the parents allowed it. But that's really a norm of our own time. I would say for back then, let's say turn of the 20th century, the norm would be the father allowed it, and the mother would, go along. So I had that one image of the father wearing the hat, the fez, the red hat of the Tanzimat era. So he was already on the road to change. And then we also find other fathers who encouraged their daughters to pursue their education and would find jobs for them in town. And that's how the girls found their jobs, just through that kind of networking. One father knows the pharmacist there, or he knows somebody who needs sewing for something or other, and he would make the connection. Or else, in the case of the lawyer, the woman became a lawyer, her father actually actively pursued her education, paid for a tutor for him to come to the house, and went with her to Aix-en-Provence to chaperone her during her course of study. So I think there is a very strong role of men in the, shall we say, emancipation of women. Thank you.
I just want to clarify my last sentence, that I said that in the 16th, 17th, and maybe 18th century, we see that the education is very related to nashim kapdaniot, to halacha, to in order to her to say the blessings and to keep the kashrut and to know exactly what to do, how to do. But this is not the case in the 19th century. the 19th century, we see both the religious education and the secular education, and we see that literacy, it's not connected only to chastity, it's connected to both, like to literacy, to education.
I'll just add, I'll use my exercise just a second, that, I mean, for example, in the more medieval period, it's more than just the father. For example, in Maimonides' response on the Melamedet Tinokot, it's the husband who for some reason teaches his wife, even though later on it kind of hurts him and benefits her brother. In another document that Renee showed yesterday, it's the mother who is really insisting that her daughter be educated. And if I can also add a personal story, I wouldn't even put it out of being some sort of child, the agency of the child. I mean, we were living when my brother was 7 or 8. We were living abroad, and my parents were teaching him Hebrew because we were going to go back to Israel. And I realized that something good is being, something important is going on when they're teaching him Hebrew. So I went and sat with them, and my parents then realized that I learned Hebrew from that. So I can see when it's taken place in the private home that a young daughter might just kind of want to be there because she understands that something important is taking place. So it's her sort of young age allows her, and we know that also from Islam, to participate in situations where maybe later. Anyway, Rebecca. Sorry.
Thank you very much. And we also see in our period that husbands teach, and this is part of their responsibility. And in Shevet Musar, Eliyahu Cohen, also from Izmir, also say to the husband that if you go to the synagogue and listen to the sermon, after that you must go to your house and teach your wife. Sorry, Rebecca.
So this is a fascinating session. Thank you so much. I didn't know about this literature before, and I'm really fascinated by it. In particular, I wanted to ask Susie a question, although I want to talk to you at length. So I'm really interested in the options for Mazaltob, because she sort of seems to have none, but I'm interested in who the potential marriage partners might have been, like how they would have been depicted. So in my mind, I'm thinking about Stempenu, A Jewish Romance by Shalom Aleichem, right? And so I'm also thinking about this whole, sort of Sephardi literature in England, where where women sort of write against this idea that the Jewish woman should marry the Christian man. So I'm wondering if this is a story where Jean is not a viable option in multiple ways. He's not the perfect romantic hero at all. But then also Jose, right, is not a viable option. And if there is in the mind of the reader, especially coming out of this community, maybe reading in Paris is different than reading this novel in Tetuan, there's the mind of the reader an idea like, but the right groom would have been a local boy. Or if there's something in the mind of the reader like, Mazaltob should never have gotten that education, it's because of that education that she's understanding, or in other words, if there's what's going on as a picture of this community in transition and the cost to women like Mazaltob, or is this Madame Bovary retold in a, essentially I would just love sort of your take on that.
Okay. Some of your questions were my own questions after I finished to read the novel, because in one side Bendahan described her as a romantic woman, but for me she is a fantasional woman, because as she said, in novels shepherds married to kings and kings married to shepherds, and this is not an unusual but a very naive thought. In other hand, I think that she couldn't cross the red line. She studied, she was good in mathematics, I didn't mention, but I mentioned lyric songs. She's going to a European teacher and she sings lyric with a fascinated voice, but she couldn't sing in front of nobody. And she's more, and she's frustrated because she knows what to read, how to read. She mentioned in the novel very European illustrated authors, and the sing, and even you. Okay, so in this kind, she's frustrated. She's not belong no either to the traditional, even to her sister, despreciada or despreciada. She's so beautiful. She's so no conventional girl that she couldn't belong to this Tetuani Jewish community, but she couldn't cross the red line. And she told in one of the sentences, I belongs in any way to the mujeres de Tetuán. So she illustrated European fantasia, but she couldn't do it. This is one. About the men's, the triangle, and it's not a triangle. José Jalfón, the Indiano, leaves her an aguna, and he say that she is more illustrated than him. So maybe she is more, yes, educated than him. Sorry, educated than her, because she asked her maybe not to leave to Buenos Aires, to leave to Paris. And the language borders are why the Indianos went to South America? Because of the language. It was easier for them. But she is in an upper level. She is with the lengua franca, the European lengua franca. And so I think that he is frightened of her. Not only the ritual of Tetuan, not only the community that struggled him with the prayers and with all the limits of the Jewish life, but the other reason that he ran away from her, from Tetuan, is she, because intimidated. Jan is a half Jewish boy because he is the result of a pogrom. Her mother was raped in a pogrom. So in our thought, he is Jew. But okay, but he seems like Christian. He has to decide which of the religions he will take, and he decided not to take any of them. So it's also she cannot run away with a non-Jewish. She's unsure. So. Okay. Everything in the atmosphere is not ending.
Okay, I would like to thank